Jeff Kimsey of Nasdaq. I am so glad to have you on my podcast, the show that is David Anderson talking market data. I do love to ham it up a bit. But let's be honest, market data can be a bit dry at times. So I try to put a bit of fun into it if we can.
You're bringing the sexy back to market data.
Well, exactly. That I must tell my wife that one. I'm not sure she'll agree with me. And my 27-year-old daughter definitely won't. She thinks I keep trying to get her to look at my podcast, and she's not persuaded. So, Jeff, I think you've seen some of these, so you get the sort of gist how they work. With all my guests, I would ask you, first of all, to introduce yourself and introduce your Nasdaq and the Nasdaq market data side of things. But bearing in mind, your LinkedIn will be on the description, so will be the website address. But give us a quick intro into the Jeff Kimsey story.
Well, let me just say it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Always excited to talk market data. So
we are sad individuals like that, aren't we?
We really are, yeah. Glutton for punishment. So I've been at Nasdaq I'm actually entering my 25th year. So a long time. I've seen a lot of change, certainly here at Nasdaq. I've been primarily in the market data space. I used to run market data products here. I'm now responsible for global data regulation, which effectively means public policy around market data, and really engaging with regulators, legislators, and the industry at large. I'm also the chairperson at the SIP,
which we're going to talk about.
Both SIPs, yeah. So I do have to give my disclaimer that while I am the chair, my remarks reflect my own views and not necessarily those of the SIP operating committee and colleagues on the operating committee or other exchanges. So that's a little bit about me. Now, Nasdaq, I think most people know. I would hope everybody that listens to your podcast does. It's a global company. We have offices around the world. We operate primarily in the financial space. We run, I think we're up to 27, 28 exchanges globally. We also have a number
as in the technology. Keep talking.
Yeah, as in exchanges. So we have options, equities, futures, commodity exchanges, primarily in the Nordics and the US.
That was it, because you took over OMX, wasn't it?
OMX, yep.
That was the one. And you took their technology as well, didn't you? Which is where I also...
Exactly, and that's the part that you were talking about as far as supplying technology globally, and so we do that. I forget how many firms we're up to there.
Even more, yes. Which are other exchanges that are not your exchange who have bought the technology from you guys.
That's right.
Got it. Got it.
We've also made other investments, other acquisitions over the years. We bought Verafin, which is KYC, AML, so basically crime fighting, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
We bought Adenza, which is really back office for brokers as well as compliance solutions. And so it helps our expand our moat as we engage with certainly industry participants.
Is that like a diversification play? Is that trying not to have too many of your eggs in just being stock exchanges, which is sort of where you started?
Yeah, and that happened probably 10-ish years ago. Adina came in as our CEO and wanted to be sure that we were focused on how can we help support our current clients, and the answer there was give them more solutions and drive more value to those clients.
Got it. Okay. So look, and another thing that you and I chatted beforehand, something I've been very conscious over the years that I've known you and all my friends in exchanges, and I also have friends in I sit in the middle. I'm nice to everybody.
You're very friendly.
Yeah, exactly. But people do occasionally want to have a go at exchanges. I mean, and I think that's something we all recognise, but I'm not sure. I am pretty sure that there's a lot of that is misunderstood, misguided, whatever. We're not going to talk about that today. maybe we'll get to some of it at the end if Jeff, if you're sort of into that. But I mean, that isn't the purpose of today. What I really wanted to do, and I'm trying to do this with a lot of my podcasts, is this to be educational. I think our industry is still quite complicated. It's still quite difficult to understand. If you're working in your own particular part of it, you probably do understand that part. But if you're in another part or a wider part, it's not clear. Even when I did the research for this podcast, and I've been 41 years and I've talked to you a lot, and I've talked to a lot of Nasdaq people a lot. But then I realized I'm not sure I fully understood some of the nuances and the history to Nasdaq. So I think what I want to do is ask for your help to shine a light and explain in less than an hour, or easier said than done, the sort of history background of the US equities markets and how that has become what it is now, what the sort of market structure is now, what the different players are now, how they differ, how they play out, maybe a little bit of cross-referencing to outside of the US. But again, that's the focus. And again, if I throw in my couple of simplistic things I'm aware of, I even remember visiting Kerry Baker Ralph at Amex down on Church. Oh, wow. Is it Church Street? The old Amex building. I mean, that's showing my age now, but I remember when Amex existed. So there was in the US markets, NYSE, Amex, and Nasdaq. But then occasionally, and I can't remember how the Philadelphia, Boston, Cincinnati. I remember in the UK we had the London Stock Exchange, but I remember there used to be a Manchester Stock Exchange, and there were regional stock exchanges in the UK a long, long time ago. And Nasdaq is the newest kid on the block. Well, maybe SIBO BATS is newer, but in sort of big mainstream regulated exchanges. I mean, when did Nasdaq start, and why did Nasdaq start? Maybe that's
I thought you said we only had an hour.
I'm sorry. Hey, look, let's give it our best shot. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kidding. The interesting thing, as you mentioned, all of these exchanges. I was reading Commissioner Peirce's speech that she gave recently, and she said,
"Who is that?" Because there might be non-Americans.
Oh, sorry. She is an SEC commissioner here in the U.S. She said that when the Exchange Act was created in 1934, there were 34 exchanges, or 36 in the U.S. And she was talking about one of the exchanges in Cleveland, Ohio, that supported, I think, the rubber industry. So and I think there's a lot of nuance to the number of exchanges, how quickly they come in and out. To your point about SIBO and BATS, they're a big competitor in the U.S. IEX, MIMEX, MIEX, these are all new exchanges as well.
Yeah.
And I bet you if you asked anybody on the street in the U.S. how many equity exchanges there are, they would get nowhere close. They may say New York, maybe they say Nasdaq. That's probably where it ends. And so a lot of people don't understand the competition that's here. Certainly when Nasdaq was created in 1971, it was an association of dealers getting together to use technology to drive value to away from this centralized pit, if you will.
Because there was no floor. I mean, in the old-fashioned, and I remember the London store. There were people on the floor with their jackets, and there still is at NYSE. But I think that's more showbiz, isn't it?
I think there's value in the floor. Certainly, there are a number of floors globally still.
You're being very polite.
Yeah, I would say we do like our business. Most of the I guess the trading that happens on exchange happens in data centers. It's not happening
electronically rather than human voice, people talking in little bits of paper, which was how it used to be done.
That's exactly right. And I would say the biggest regulation that happened over the last 20 years, 20 plus years, that really changed the kind of how the U.S. operated was Reagan MS, which came in 2005. I think I think it was
and
put
that's
in 2000.
Regulation National Market System.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. I use a lot of acronyms, so I appreciate that. And there were a number of rules within that, 10 to 12 rules or so that kind of dictated how exchanges, how industry participants needed to operate. And there were a couple of big rules within that. Certainly the fair access rule. There were limitations on rebates that exchanges could offer. There was transparency that was created, and so it kind of changed the face of trading in the U.S. and created a proliferation of exchanges as well. EDGX moved from an ECN to an exchange. ARCA, I think I can't remember if they were an exchange or an ECN and became an exchange. BATS certainly came out.
And what? Just hold that. An ECN, which is that. What does ECN stand for? I'm trying to remember.
That's an electronic communications network.
I I just doubted myself for a second. So, and you and I were chatting about this on another conversation we were having. What's a regulated exchange? I mean, in the UK or Europe, they have regulated exchanges, and then they have multilateral trading facilities, which there's sort of degrees of regulation. I mean, help me out here. What is there a hierarchy of regulation? Is hierarchy the right word, or just different degrees?
There's certainly a difference in regulation between exchanges in the U.S. and those that become exchanges. There's benefits and there's certainly issues that disparities, if you will, between us and ATSs, which is very similar to MTFs over in Europe. So
is listing a key?
Listing is certainly a key, but you don't have to have listings to be an exchange. You have to effectively apply to be an exchange with the SEC or file to be an exchange with the SEC. And once you become an exchange, you have to treat all like customers equally, right? Fair, reasonable, and not unreasonably discriminatory. And so you can discriminate, but only insofar as they're different types of clients. And we do that a lot on the market data side, where we draw differences between professionals and non-professionals, right? We give a very large discount to non-professionals. We differentiate with normalized versus raw data. We differentiate between derived and original content. We direct and indirect, display, non-display. So there's a number of ways that we do, but as an exchange, everything that we do, we essentially have to file for. So we say to the SEC, hey, we're going to do this. It goes out for notice and comment. Everybody can put their, have their say in what we're doing.
Everyone being, when you say everyone,
and anyone.
Literally,
Anderson can write a comment letter.
Got it.
And there are some interesting comment letters, I would say, from the retail participants.
Okay.
Individual investors may say things that you wouldn't expect to hear on some comment letters. So you may want to use ChatGPT or something
to look up the best.
Find the most interesting. So everything goes out for notice and comment, right? So it's not, exchanges don't do anything in the secret. They don't discriminate between clients. Everything is fair access. Except for what I was talking about as far as,
But isn't that the essence of what the SEC and frankly other regulators around the world are trying to do? They want a fair market. Now, I hark back to my mother who used to tell me, darling, the world isn't fair. You've got to get over yourself, when I said it's not fair. I mean, is the US equity markets entirely fair? That's not an easy question to answer. Where I'm coming from. I mean, what?
Yeah, it's a very loaded question, and the reason I say that is, exchanges do need to treat clients fairly and equally. ATSs, however, can segment clients, right? And so they can treat clients differently on a bilateral basis. And there's certainly benefit in that, right? I think exchanges would like to do more of that. And I think ATSs would like to have more of the benefits that exchanges do, right? As an exchange, we, depending on the amount of trading and quoting we do, we have, we're a part of the revenue share within the SIP. And we'll talk a little bit about the securities information processor in the U.S. But that's one of the benefits of being an exchange, right? There's a pool of money that you immediately have access to based on how much you're trading and quoting.
But again, I remember when I first started looking into exchange data 20, 30 years ago, exchanges didn't used to charge. There were three main earnings of money. There was trading fees, there was listing fees, and there were market data fees. Sometimes you got clearing, but the three big ones were listing, trading, and data. And in the early days, data was quite a small element, but it's got bigger over time. How has the data business, how has the nature of the data coming from an exchange, how has that evolved? And in a couple of minutes, describe exchange data. Anybody's a specialist in exchange data. This is going to be basic stuff, but there's a lot of people out there who don't really understand this.
Yeah, and I think to understand exchange market data, you need to understand regulated versus unregulated. And let me focus on regulated first, because as you said, 25 years ago, it was very different than it is now. And I will tell you that actually 25 years ago, Nasdaq Total View, our premier product, our proprietary product, was $250 for professionals. Now it's $76. It was roughly the same price for non-pros, right? So the pricing hasn't changed much from a person perspective. Certainly with the proliferation of high-frequency trading and the amount of volume coming into the exchange and the amount of trading that was done, there were other fees that were introduced to segment a person from a machine. There's the non-display fees, but there's also been a lot of, growth in other areas within the exchange. Just recently we've put, I think it's one exchange in the cloud. We have two others that are coming, right? And so as you think about the proliferation of delivery of content, certainly there have been changes. There's, FPGA, field programmable gate array, which creates more determinism in the data, and really, I guess, just ensuring that as we talk to clients, what they're looking for, we can deliver to them, and do it in a thoughtful and meaningful way that helps support their business, and I say that because our clients want, use our data in critical infrastructure. So we need to be sure that we're doing it in a positive way that doesn't disrupt them. We spend a lot of money on infrastructure, on ensuring that we have the right resiliency, the right capacity. And if you think about how much volume there has been recently, putting aside, of course, the politics of what's going on in the
US. No matter why it happened.
Yeah. The recent tariff conversation has created just an influx of trading. When I remember back in 06, 07, before the financial crisis, we trade like 5 or 6 billion shares a day, but the industry would trade 5 or 6 billion shares a day. That essentially doubled with the financial crisis, and then it came back down to between 6 and 8. But over the last couple of months, it's been up to as high as 25 billion, I think.
And
25 billion shares.
That has always been a difference between the US and definitely the UK, which I'm most familiar with, and Europe. We in the UK, and I think in Europe, we didn't, as individuals, buy and sell stocks and shares. My parents didn't do that. I wasn't aware of it. I was growing up. It was only when I think I got some Reuters share options I started to dabble a bit. But in the US markets, the US economy, US society, buying and selling shares as a retail investor, 12 Schwab and all that, I mean, was much, and Merrill Lynch, there were offices on the high streets of small towns. That makes the US stock markets different. I mean, you must have a much bigger retail market than most other economies. Again, unfair question to ask because you're probably not aware of the percentages in other countries. Although you probably do because you see a little bit of the Nasdaq. Is that? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that, and I need to look up the
I'm not,
yeah.
The
I know,
generalities.
I know you're not putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
I think that there's roughly, I want to say like 5% of trading in the U.S. is retail. But there is a lot of directed flow, self-directed flow from retail. To your point, Schwab, Fidelity, E-Trade, there's Robinhood, SoFi, but there's also an expansion from Asian firms into the U.S. as well.
The 25 by 7 sort of concept. Yeah. Or 25 by 5, isn't it? 24 by 5. I'll get the numbers right eventually. Yeah. I knew I'd get the numbers eventually.
Well, we haven't added an extra hour in the day yet, but we may get there.
Yeah, exactly. The wonders of what Nasdaq can do.
Yeah, exactly. No, so, there's been, I guess, the retail phenomenon, meme stock phenomenon back in 21 that, I don't know that it brought retail back to trading, but it certainly reinvigorated the retail audience to come back to trading stocks. I think after the financial crisis, a lot of people lost faith in the market, and there were other things that exacerbated that. But I think retail is certainly back. We've seen a lot of increased retail participation as well. But my point about the Asian,
appetite
Asian influx is more about, firms from Asia that are coming to the U.S. to cater to retail. Right?
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah.
So Webull, as an example, was a big, Asian firm that is, now pretty big over here. And my point is that in the U.S. there's a lot of self-directed flow. In Asia there's a lot of self-directed flow as well, and that's a very mobile friendly, friendly
society.
Region, right?
The population.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, getting back to regulated data, that's one of the areas of growth that we've seen certainly over the last, call it 10 years, is the expansion of U.S. data globally. And I would say that we have presence in Asia where 10 years ago we didn't, and most countries in Asia, the second most interesting area outside of their own home country is the U.S. Right? All of these interesting stocks, whether that's Tesla or Meta or Google or whoever it is really interesting to.
Well, I mean, again, I'm straying a bit off the point now, but I read some newspaper articles recently. It was all about, with all the goings on in the stock markets, you should diversify. You shouldn't rely on, the Fabulous 7, which are predominantly on, which has driven the S&P. You should diversify. But then this person was observing that actually so much of other companies in other parts of the world are so dependent on the US. If the US, gosh forbid, was to implode and whatever, it would drag everybody else down anyway. So actually, you might as well. So I'm not making investment advice here. It was just things I'd read. But again, and I pick you up on this because I like to understand it better. You've got this global dimension because you had bought OMX, the Norman. So you run stock exchanges in the Nordics. So whereas I'm picking up that when you're talking about Asia Pacific, you're not necessarily, or maybe you are running stock exchanges, but more you're selling Nasdaq North American data to a hungry APAC audience, which is slightly different to the Nordic situation.
Yeah, that's right. And that is a big growth vehicle for us, certainly, is selling our data into Asia. And, just to give you a couple of stats on retail participation. So, we've seen roughly 1.4 billion shares of retail inflow into ETFs and stocks, over the last couple of months. That's on a daily basis. And the amount traded this month alone daily is about $60 billion US. Right?
I mean, how for us working in the quote unquote institutional market data world, does that retail angle, where should we, people like myself or people working in market data teams, because most of the community I'm most familiar with are the people sitting in Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, whatever, or in the big data vendors, Refinitiv, old now LSEG, Bloomberg, etc. The more, what do you call it, the classic traditional hub of market data. Does the retail story matter to them?
Does it matter to them? Well,
should it matter?
I guess what I would say is that yes, certainly it matters to them. They have a lot of brokers that support retail. Many of them also have retail businesses, right? So Morgan Stanley purchased E-Trade, right? And so that's a big retail online broker. I think the other phenomena that changed recently with retail is, they pretty much have never paid for data, right? Just individual investors never pay for data. Now they don't pay for trading either, right? And so I think driving retail participation and driving more interest in the stock market drives more profit and growth from those firms, not from an explicit but from an implicit paying perspective, right? So I think they do care. I think they care deeply about it, and I think retail participation, whether it's self-directed or 401k or whatever it is something that is helpful to the industry.
So we have Nasdaq and all its brilliance, the leading and most powerful and wonderful stock exchange in North America.
In the world.
In the world. Sorry, I do apologize. In the world. And then we have minor, small-scale exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange. The newest. What is the nickname? Is it because we call the Bank of England the old lady? Does the New York Stock Exchange have a sort of?
We just call them NYSE.
NYSE, yeah, NYSE. Yeah. But look, NYSE's been there for an awfully long time, big and established. Now owned by ICE, the International Continental Exchange, I think, which was a commodity exchange out of Atlanta, Georgia, I think. Mm-hmm. So that in itself was an intriguing situation to see unfold. But you've got yourselves, you've got NYSE, you've got these new exchanges popping up, you've got SIBO and whatever, and therefore it's quite complicated to plug into all of those. But you've got this wonderful thing called the US Consolidated Tape Plan. What on earth is that? And everybody in Europe is looking over to you because there's one coming in Europe, and we've all seen how wonderful yours is.
Yeah. And let's talk in depth about the SIP, the Securities Information Processor.
And what is that phrase you keep using? Because you talk about is it the CTP, the plans, and then the SIP?
Yeah, I'll go into all the acronyms as well. One other point that I want to make though is because I didn't get to the non-regulated aspect of it.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No. But to your point, it's everybody thinks of exchanges as this, regulated entity, and that's all they do. But exchanges are, broadening the distribution and the content of their information, how they're distributing it, what they're distributing. So as an example, if you think about, ICE or NYSE had purchased IDC, right? Which was a huge maker.
Yes.
LSEG purchased Refinitiv, which used to be Thomson Reuters. We've made some very small acquisitions.
And Six in Switzerland is both the exchange and the big data vendor.
Yeah. And so it's, exchange groups are not just disseminating regulated data; they're doing non-regulated data as well, right? And so we've launched something recently that called Tape D that gives real-time pricing of private investments. We have alternative data like our medical claim insights, right? So that you can understand what's going on in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry. We're supporting the Bruce ATS, which is, supports 24-hour trading, or overnight trading rather. And so, the growth of data as you see it on, our earnings isn't necessarily because as an exchange, we're growing regulated, but because we're growing non-regulated products. And so those are much more competitive. Not to say that regulated isn't competitive, because I can tell you when I was head of products, we competed daily with the likes of Nasdaq and other firms. And so it's just important for people to understand that and not, and not think, exchanges are growing, I must be paying more.
No,
regulated data.
I mean, again, if we had more time, I'd love to. We're going to have you back, Jet. We're going to have to go into some detail on those, because alternative data has been a hot subject in the whole FISD world for a few years now.
Yes.
But the next new kid on the block, newish, is private data.
Yes.
It was interesting. I observed, was it Databricks, who managed to raise billions or massive amounts of money, which they would normally have done by floating on an exchange. So there's definitely something going on in private markets. Too much for us to talk about. Let's focus on arguably the sort of classic traditional regulated stock markets and I jumped ahead, but so the consolidated tape, the SIP, what is that all about? And there's the current, which has been going for some time, and then there's a new iteration soon,
yes, and we'll get into that as well. I guess if I told you that there were 3 plans that oversaw and governed the level 1 equity data in the U.S., you probably couldn't name those plans, could you?
What, A, B, and C? I mean, I think the top one's Nasdaq. Oh God, I looked them up actually. I did do, but I could never remember.
Well, I believe you did your research. But there's and this is where it's just so nuanced. It gets a little bit confusing. So there's the Consolidated Quotation Plan, which governs tape A and B quotes. There's the Consolidated Tape Association Plan, which governs trades for tapes A and B. And then there's a UTP plan, which governs both quotes and trades for tape C.
Which is the Nasdaq bit, I think.
Right, so tape A is NYSE listed securities, tape C is Nasdaq listed securities, and tape B are ETFs and regional listed securities. They call them regionals. They're not really regional anymore, right? SIBO, I was listening to your podcast with Stephen. He mentioned that SIBO is listed on SIBO in the U.S., right? They're on tape B. And so my point is not to certainly call you out for knowing the plan, but more that
it's confusing.
It gets confusing. And so, what we'll talk about is the new plan, one plan to rule them all, to use a Tolkien reference, but bringing those plans together. And so, what the plan does is it governs the dissemination of level 1, which is the best quote from every exchange, as well as every trade that happens in the U.S., whether it's on exchange or off exchange, and that gets disseminated, basically globally. And so there is a governance committee that oversees that. It's called the operating committee. We combine those committees, and so we only have one meeting instead of multiple meetings for each of the plans. Today, each exchange SRO has one vote, and so exchange groups operate multiple SROs, so exchange groups have more votes. Not to pick on any particular exchange, but IEX and MEMX and MIEX have one vote. I think SIBO has 5 votes. I think NYSE has 5 votes. I think we have 4 votes. And we'll talk about how that's changing. But there are other governance ideals that we have to abide by, like confidentiality, conflicts, disclosures. And so, there's an operating rhythm that we have And certainly there are a number of things that we're working on these days. We can touch on 24-hour trading, or 23-hour trading with a pause for an hour. We're working on odd lots and round lots, fractional shares, right? So this is one of the probably most critical systems, financial systems in the U.S. to disseminate this level 1 information. There's 2 processors. There's one for the UTP, which is coincidentally Nasdaq, for Nasdaq shares. There's one for CTA, named SIAC, which is owned and operated by ICE. There's also 2 administrators, one under Nasdaq doing UTP and one under SIAC doing CTA.
So a processor is the mechanics, the computers, all of that technology, keeping it working, make it work. I think that I understand that. The administrators, what does that mean?
Yeah, the administrators are the ones that administer the policies, the pricing, the billing, the collections of the fees for level 1 data. And so, there are 2 separate websites, one utpplan.com, one ctaplan.com, where you can go and find all the fees, and all the policies associated with each of the plans. They're a little bit different, the policies are, and so we'll get to how do we how do we bring those together. Certainly there will be change to the industry, and so we need to be sure that we're making well-informed decisions using industry participation through the advisory committee. And so that's an important function. The advisory committee certainly helps support each of the decisions. They give us input. They help ensure that we understand it from the differing points of view within the advisors. There are vendors, there are retail firms, there are bulge brackets. There's a number of different types of firms represented, so that we can get a good feel, a wide feel from the industry of what's happening. So the data goes out. The firms receive the data, they understand, and looking at any of the screens that you have access to understand what the prevailing quote is from each exchange, as well as the NBBO, right, the National Best Bid and Offer. And you can use that to make decisions about, should I buy this stock, should I sell this stock? And as somebody who receives the data, if you're, say, a firm on Wall Street that receives the data, you would pay, for the usage of that content that goes back into the plan, and that gets remunerated back to the exchanges based on a revenue allocation formula that was created within Reg NMS some 20 years ago.
So again, there's a lot more to talk about, just the current plans. But if I can, I'm also conscious of the time. There's also the exchanges all are participating in this plan, but then each of the exchanges, including your good cells, will have this other business called proprietary data, where you sell other data that sits outside the plan. What's the nature and scope of this proprietary? I mean, not just from Nasdaq, generally. How does it differ from what's available in the tapes, and sort of who's it for? Is it for a particular type of audience?
Yeah, so there's 2. I mean, there's a lot of different proprietary data sets that we sell, both regulated and unregulated. There's 2 primary products that we sell. One is a top of book product, is effectively the same data that we send to the SIP.
Yeah.
Right. And so
why would somebody buy? Can they buy that cheaper from you than they can buy the whole SIP? Is that if somehow they only want your data?
Yeah, it depends on the firm. I mean, sometimes it's cheaper. Most of the time it's cheaper. I think those that want to buy our products, are primarily do it because they don't necessarily need to see the whole market, right?
Okay.
So, as an example, if there's a stock listed on Nasdaq and we trade most of that, then maybe it makes sense to look at the Nasdaq only data. And so I think firms make decisions based on different criteria.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that our depth of product, Nasdaq Total View, which is, includes the top of book, but it also includes a full depth, gives people more than what they can see on the SIP. The way that I think about it, which is, probably different than a lot of people in the industry, is that, with Reg NMS and with the order protection rule, which basically says you can't trade through the best, the MBBO, they can get the SIP data with the MBBO, right? So if you want more data that that you don't need for OPR, like depth, you can buy that from the from each of the individual exchanges.
So that model you described, obviously you guys do it best, but it's a similar concept constructed in subtly different ways, but the basic concept of, depth of order book and what have you. I can hear fun and games in the background there. It's the joys of podcasting, we can't see it. That's one thing. That depth of order book is probably what I've been familiar with as to what people will pay more money for. And the big hedge funds and bulge bracket firms and these sort of players are typically the ones who would sort of gobble that up. Is that too simplistic a statement? Or?
Yeah, I think that's probably too simplistic. I would say, the depth of market that we sell based on the value of what we're disseminating, right? We try to make it as as flexible as possible from a policy perspective, right? So clients, and we don't necessarily need to get into this because I think that's our next podcast. We try to allow for many different use cases. And so to your question, is it more expensive? Well, maybe, but it depends on the use that you have. And it, and there may be areas where it's actually cheaper, honestly, than, certainly some of the other.
But this is a classic example that we chatted about offline beforehand. You're being flexible, but in the nature of you being helpful and flexible, it does probably make it a bit more complicated to work out where you sit in all of this. But I think that is the nature of the beast. If you want flexibility and choice, it's going to be a bit more complicated. So that's my...
I think that's exactly right. It's hard to have flexibility with simplicity. We could charge, call it $100 per user, and that's the only fee we have. And oh, by the way, good luck getting data on Yahoo anymore, or Google.
The perfectionists or the people who've done it best at Bloomberg, they charge a single price, but it's a pretty darn high price. People only probably use 5% of their product. They all use different 5%, but they've got rather a simple model that there's one price. I'm conscious of time, so
yes.
So a relatively quick. What's the next stage? And we are going to have to come back to this in a future episode. But the sort of what's happening now and in the near term future about the tape singular.
Yeah. So we have our current, right? We have everything that's going on with our current, and then in I think it was 2020, the SEC put out a governance order that basically said, hey, you need to change the governance of the SIP. And a few other things. And so that finally became law in 2024, I want to say. Basically, they said, hey, exchanges, you need to come up with a new SIP plan. One plan, again, to rule them all. And what that's going to do is that's going to change voting. So no longer does each SRO have one vote. Now the SRO groups have one vote. If you have more than 15% market share, you get 2 votes. It's going to change the advisors and change it nominally, I would say. But we have good advisor participation. And then it changed the administrator. And it said, basically exchanges can't be the administrators of level 1 data. We think that the SEC thinks that there's too much of a conflict there, which as a practical matter, I can tell you that, they're completely separate insofar as how we do business. I know
it is what it is.
The head of the administration of the UTP keeps everything walled off from everybody else at Nasdaq, and we need to sign attestations.
So when is this all miraculously going to sort of come to be?
Yeah. So it sounds pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
New administrator, new voting, change to advisors.
And there were no arguments along the way. Everybody was in violent agreement at every stage.
At every step of the way. And we say that tongue in cheek, certainly.
Of course.
I am just noticing how intricate it actually is as the chairperson. And I'm involved in some things that I'm like, oh my gosh, really? We have to figure that out? And so it's, what I think we've organized ourselves.
My wife has just come back as well, so we might get her joining in. You're not going to get eaten by your dog, are you?
I certainly hope not. This is a topic he feels very strongly about.
I can tell.
No, so I think we've organized ourselves really well. We have a number of subcommittees that we're looking to make progress on. One is to create the new administrator, put it out for RFP. Before we do that, we have to create an RFP. Before that, we need somebody who has expertise in creating an RFP. Before that, we need to be able to figure out how to pay them because there's no revenue on the in the tape plan, in the new tape plan. And so it's like you keep going back and back and back. All right, and then you move forward. So we've organized ourselves. We have the administrative subcommittee looking at that. We have the fees and policy subcommittee as well, which actually is the only date that the SEC, one of the only early dates the SEC gave us, which basically said by November of this year, you need to have pricing and policies for this new plan.
If you're not a betting man, but if you were a betting, when's the soonest you could imagine this actually happening? And again, being a bit pessimistic, what's the latest? What's the range of when this could happen? Roughly.
Yeah. And the SEC asked us to put the plan together, and I'm going to get to this point. I know I haven't given you actual answer, but the SEC asked us to put together, what the plan is to create the plan. And we exchanges got together, and we kind of mapped it out, and we had this pretty intricate Gantt chart, and we came up with 30 months. And we said, we think it's going to take us 2.5 years to, get this thing going once it's approved and hits the Federal Register, which effectively puts us at March, April of 27.
But is it we're going to live with the current scheme for a few years to come, and then there's going to be, again, horribly unfair question to ask, when it all happened. Because I haven't. It hasn't stopped me already, has it? Sorry. How momentous? How is this going to create a lot of confusion? Your dog he really didn't like that question.
Well, I'm going to have to get my dog up here then, because everybody would absolutely love that.
So we got this thing 30 months from maybe November. Big change. Will it just happen overnight and everybody say, oh, that's the new system, easy peasy, no problem? Or can you picture quite a complicated situation of the consumers of the tape, the producers, all, that it somehow doesn't quite go smoothly as everybody hopes? I'm not sure I'm asking the question in the right way. I'm just trying to...
But I think where you're going is is a really great question to ask. And, I can't see into the future. I have no idea. Is this thing going to be, really easy?
I'll have been retired. I will fully retire by then. So.
There you go. Can we flip a switch and everything's going to be great? And I think we know we're probably going to have issues. I think we're trying to mitigate those issues by putting, some really good, thoughtful discussions and movement behind it. And I would tell you that we do have a good amount of engagement and movement toward this new plan. As the chairperson, I want to see us hit these dates, right? I mean, the SEC has said, hey, you need to do it by these dates. They've said also that if you can't meet those dates, you need to tell us why you're not meeting those dates. Right now we're early in the process. I feel good about where we are. I feel like we're making good progress. There are some things that are, they're annoyingly holding us back. But those are to be expected.
I mean, it's a big job. It's a big job.
It is. But I would say, again, the engagement I think we have is terrific. All the exchanges are engaged. We have multiple meetings weekly, to make progress. And I think we've made a lot of good progress so far. So, we'll see. We'll see.
I know. Hey, come on. It won't be boring.
It certainly won't. And it's not.
Good. I mean,
it's definitely not boring.
These are complicated things. This is what makes our industry cool and sexy. Why new people should want to join our industry, because there are things going on, and it's at the core of the whole financial system. And the financial system, let's be frank, is at the core of everything we do in society. That's my big picture take, which actually, given the timing, I'm getting to this segue, and I'll waffle for a bit to give you time to think about this. This is where I give you the chance for your final thoughts, your big picture thoughts, the things that you want this audience of market data people who are interested in exchange data, interested in the wider market data world. We never got to talk about the wider market data world, but I was talking to a couple of people recently who said, David, your idea of picking 3 topics, you just scratch the surface, go into one topic and go into, and I promise, in fact, maybe, if you don't want your lunch, was it Joe Rogan who did a 7-hour one with a certain gentleman?
Wow.
Maybe we could make ours 6, Jeff.
Let's do it. You know what? Let's do a marathon. Let's try 24 hours of market data.
Well, that's it. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm trying to keep these tight, but people are telling me they want to hear more, and it's difficult to scratch the surface. So your final thoughts, the big thoughts that you wish the world out there understood and knew of.
Yeah. Hard to boil it down to 30 seconds, but
no, you got more. You got 2, 3, 4 minutes. Yeah.
I guess what I would say is, I do think that most people in the industry have good intentions. I don't think there is anybody, including exchanges, that are out to get people, to hurt people. I don't think the industry is out to skirt policies and to get away with things. I think most people have good intentions. And I think it's about having a dialogue. And, reasonable minds can disagree, certainly. But it's about opening that dialogue so that we can continue to make progress. And I think that's really the key, is how can we do things together? Because as we, where things get contentious is when people are, throwing rocks or, something.
And using emotional language that doesn't help. I mean, again, I watch both sides of this argument, and my observation, for what it's worth, is look, it's a lot of the customers' fault, because they used to own you guys, or not, I don't know what Nasdaq's ownership was, but a lot of the exchanges were owned by their members.
That's right.
And then they had this great idea, why don't we go public and make loads of money by selling it and going for profit? And then they became for profit public companies with shareholders and responsibilities, which means it is the responsibility of those entities to make as much money, as much profit as they can, legally, and hopefully morally right. And the customers obviously want to pay as little. I mean, that wouldn't, whichever side you're on, that's what you'd want. And I think your point about dialogue, people can talk. And again, my observation is I hate it when people just are destructive and critical and emotive. I always say to people, look, maybe you don't like it, right, but you've got to see it from the other person's point of view and try and offer a constructive suggestion, not just tell them that they're all quote unquote evil. And I've heard that said, and it's like, come on. But people are saying that. They've said it on my podcast. People I like. And I can't seriously think they really do think that. Anyway, look, and again, any final?
Yeah, I guess to that point though, I would say, I fully appreciate having to deal, with 300 different policy documents and understanding each, and trying to do the right thing. I feel for firms that are going through that, and I think the best thing to do there, again, is that conversation, right? We never shy away from having a discussion with the industry on any topic, certainly, and so I think that's important for us to continue to talk.
And I got a further comment on that, which I think automation could come to the rescue, because I think there are 300 different venues, and for eminently sensible, logical reasons, they have different policy constructs and whatever. And I don't think, even frankly with discussion, you can realistically expect that to change dramatically. You can tidy up around the edges, and maybe common language is something I've heard people talk about. So there are things we can do. We shouldn't give up. We can try. Mm-hmm. But I've got to believe that some sort of technology, all this AI stuff. And again, as I mentioned to you, tomorrow, don't know when it'll be published. For you and I, it's tomorrow. I've got Ben Whittam-Smith talking about ODRL and the whole digital rights management sort of project that's been going on and on. People have been trying to solve this. People on the customer side and maybe the data aggregating data vendor side, and they haven't yet. But maybe with AI. Maybe that there could be a sort of helping hand to get AI to do all the sort of, and now I don't know, but it's going to be exciting. It's going to be interesting as we as we go forward. So I do expect I'm going to talk to Tom Davin, head of FISD, and say we should have your dog on an FISD panel.
Let's do it.
Going forward, because he has strong opinions about market data.
Cooper, my dog, loves market data. So yes,
he's I was going to say a dog of fine taste. So look, Jeff, thank you so much for doing this. And again, I apologize. I do dream up questions in my head at the time. I hope none of them were too horrible or whatever. But I didn't notice you squirming on any of them. You seem to handle them or bat them away very elegantly. So,
well, like I said, we're always willing to have a conversation.
Well, that's what this is.
Thank you. This has been great. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. All right, let's say bye-bye, and don't go away, but I'm going to stop the recording.